cameras that doesn't flash.
Molly, you turn that
Oh,
on
yeah,
the
I think it
computer.
was good without the flash.
Turn the sound on the computer so we can hear it. Okay. All right, well, I appreciate everybody coming out tonight, and this is our first ever Telling History Story panel. And what we have here is 4 people that are in the middle of it. That they're in the process of telling historical stories. And I'm going to hold off because I want to get into this discussion. I'm not going to give a lot of background on everybody right now. But I want everybody, real quick, just to tell us something exciting that you're doing now in the way of storytelling, some exciting project that you're working on now. We can start with Lorraine.
Well, Tom, you know about this project. We are putting together a screenplay that is based on a little-known incident from Bennett College, maybe well-known to you all, but not to the world at large. A 1938 movie theater boycott that was led by students from Bennett College and joined by students from A&T and some other institutions to protest the censorship of roles in Hollywood movies that were crossing racial lines, but when they were shown locally in white theaters, the theater owners were snipping them right out. So the Bennett Bells got wind of this and organized a community-wide boycott of white movie theaters that went on for months. Keeping in mind this was 1938.
We could have a movie about Bennett College, right? That would be. Or trying to get in once.
Trying to solve problems. I got into the movie making business first as a journalist and then into movie making because I found out at that time nobody was doing movies on black history. Our story was not being told. And I went to a meeting in Los Angeles representing the NAACP, Mr. Hooks. And the producer had it all wrong. They had one man escaping slavery in Georgia and moving up the Underground Railroad to Canada, but missing the mistress on the plantation in Georgia so much. That role was played by Dorian Harewood. He worked his way back down the railroad, Underground Railroad, to be with the mistress. And representing Mr. Hooks, I went out to Hollywood, and Paramount was embarrassed by the story that was about to be told, and he was trying to talk the producer out of it. And the producer finally got angry after about 2 hours of meeting, and he said, listen, you folks don't like the way I make my movie. You make your own damn movie. And I took that story back to New York. NAACP headquarters was New York at that time. And I started working on a historical story. I had a guest visit me I came to New York and stayed with me at my apartment. And he read the entire script we had. And he's head of the Howard University Historical. He's dean, in fact.
Was this Solomon Northrup at the time?
And this was the story of Solomon Northrup, the man who built the church where the 9 people were killed, the man who led the first slave rebellion in this country, and had become a millionaire in 1719 and built that church where the 9 people were killed. And we did that story, and it was nominated for 18 awards and won 9 of them: Best Acting, Best Directing, supporting actress and supporting actor and so forth and so on, and received an award here. Huggy Bear, Antonio Fargas, came here to the school where he was made an award, won an award for his acting role. I did two more, one of which was shown earlier today.
Charlotte Fortin's Mission.
Charlotte Fortin's Mission. The lady whose father was a deputy ambassador to England, and Lincoln had appointed him. They were a millionaire black family living in Philadelphia in 1860. Anyway, the three films, historical films, and you asked me what am I doing now. About that time, I wanted to do a story on the Coast Guard, and I set it up in the Virgin Islands. I had an admiral as one of my advisors on it, and we were all ready to go down, and the hurricane came along, and so we ended up carrying generators and cell phones and a number of other things needed down there, and we're still working on that project.
I want to stop for a second, and I think this is worthy of a round of applause, right? They go ahead. Said make your own movie. He did it. And that's a lesson, I think, for the students that are in here, is that don't just be critics of movies or watchers of movies or consumers of movies forever. Go out and do it, and think about how much we enjoyed that product today. And you've got a story about Emmett Till that's in the works.
That the story of Emmett Till and how one reporter that attended his funeral 2 weeks ago, Simeon Booker, who was laid to rest in the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. He was bold enough to publish the story of Emmett Till in Jet magazine, Simeon Booker. And they spoke about that at his funeral. And I knew Simeon. He had predicted great things for me in Jet magazine, none of which came true, of course. And we wanted to Simeon wanted to do the right thing by publishing the picture in Jet magazine. And for the first time in history, every major journalism outlet came to Mississippi to tell the story of the killing of this young boy, supposedly for whistling at a person's wife there in a small country store. About 2 years ago, or 1 year ago, I guess, she was about to pass, and she admitted that they had made up the story. It was not true. So, but any of you who've seen the picture of this boy that were grabbed by Klansmen and other people in Mississippi, and he was killed by taking a ship anchor and smashing his skull to death. The black journalists who killed, who covered the story, were not able to come as journalists, and they had to dress up in overalls and straw hats. But as they went looking to get evidence of the men who had killed him, and the nation's press for the first time in history. The New York Times, the LA Times, NBC, ABC, CBS, the Atlanta Constitution, Chicago Times, all Mississippi papers, all of them covered it, this story. And they identified the killers and turned in the evidence. The jury went out for 20 minutes and found them not guilty, even though they had 4 people who pointed to them and said these were the men who did the killing. That story has never been told as a movie, and that's what we are attempting to do now.
Tamara, what new project do you have coming up?
You really want me to follow that? Actually, there's a bit of history in what I'm working on. My focus right now is continues to be health. So my writing has been about health and African American health for a long time. And what I'm doing now, there's actually a lot of history in this. What I'm doing now is what seemed like a pivot, which was I teach yoga. And I teach it here at Bennett. We have become the first that we know of HBCU to offer it as a 4-credit course. And I thought the thing that I say is that we put it at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we have to have a minimum of 10 students. And I told the provost at the time, I was like, I hope that I'll get 10 students to come. We put 2 sections on, and in 48 hours, I had 70 students sign up for the class. This year, I will have taught, at the end of this year, I will have taught 100 this year, and I think, so the total is probably 250 people have taken the class. I wondered why, and came to find out, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, that a lot of the students have expressed that they were looking for something to alleviate anxiety and depression and stress. And so when I polled them, did an informal poll, I found that about 50% of the students in the class self-diagnosed as having depression or anxiety. And that is, the national average is about 11%. So that's a huge number. And I took that right to the psychology department, to one of our professors, Dr. Campbell, and said, what do we do with this? And she said, this is a study. We need to do do something serious. So where this has taken us, we've done some speaking. We've got several things coming up. We'll be in Michigan in March at the Depression on College campuses. We will be speaking in Durham in April. We were at the Omega Institute last fall. We were working with the Yoga Alliance on doing some things. So what we're looking at is causes of depression and how that manifests, and looking at the relationship between race-based trauma and how that continues to manifest in African American lives, and looking at whether or not that is something that is passed down generationally. Is that something that's going on in the genes? Just trying to figure out exactly what is going on. But there's the other historical part of this is that we are seeing that African American women in particular are at risk of so many of mental health issues and physical health issues, and looking at how that has been the case historically and how we might be able to mitigate that a little bit. So that's the thing. And the other historical part of it is trying to figure out how to bring yoga, which is a 5,000-year-old Indian tradition and practice, to contemporary African American women. So there's that.
Hey everybody, I know I came up here a little earlier. I'm Kiana again, and everyone calls me Kiki. I am a professional actress, and also I'm a third-year college student at the University of Georgia. And for the last 4 years, I've been working professionally in the film industry, and I've been blessed enough to work on a lot of African American and Black history type films and television shows. The very first show that I did is called Show Me a Hero, and it's a HBO miniseries, and this show followed how the government in Yonkers, New York, went about integrating housing between African Americans and a predominantly white community by way of a lottery. So my character, Tasha O'Neill, is the daughter of Norma O'Neill, played by Miss LaTanya Richardson Jackson, also Samuel L. Jackson's wife. She's a great mentor of mine. And basically, it follows multiple lives of the African Americans that were actually picked in the lottery to move into this white neighborhood and how they were treated by way of just crossing over the bridge. Now they're just on the other side of Yonkers, living in better housing, but is it better because they're not really welcomed in this neighborhood? So for that being my very first TV show, I was really happy to be able to tell such a story, a real story, and I was really honored to be a part of that. I went on to do a TV show called Being Mary Jane. I'm pretty sure you guys have heard of that. I loved working on that.
Didn't you steal somebody's boyfriend in that program?
No, I didn't. That would have been cool too. No, my character's name was Renee. I love playing fun characters. My character's name is Renee, and she's one of Niecy's friends that she works with at the mall. So I was on one episode of Being Mary Jane, and what I love so much about that, I mean, I look up to Gabrielle Union so much, and to have an African-American woman leading a TV show and being such a powerful, her character is so powerful, and she owns herself and everything about her. So I loved being a part of that show, and that was amazing. I've done other TV shows and movies, but another one that sticks out to me a lot is Black Lightning. We watched that earlier, and as I said earlier, this is the very first African American superhero family show on network television, and I love to see how everyone is like reacting to it and taking this new TV show in. It really shines light on a lot of neighborhoods that they don't have the best government in place in these cities, and they don't have a lot of crime being like regulated very well. So to see this superhero Black Lightning controlling all of this, and also being a principal and keeping these kids educated and bringing them up well, is a really great story for me, and I'm happy to be able to tell that. And last is a film that we're going to be watching after this. I'm part of a film called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And this also has something to do with like the science part of African American history. Henrietta Lacks was a woman who in the 1950s, she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. And when the doctors took a piece of her tumor away, they found out that her cells continue to replicate over and over again, and they are immortal. So her cells, without her knowledge or her family's knowledge, were used to create all types of medical breakthroughs, such as in vitro fertilization, the polio vaccine, flu vaccine, all of these things that each and every one of us in this room have been affected by the HeLa cells in some way, whether it be, your parents, your grandparents, or yourself, some way you've been affected. And this is from one African-American female. So my character is young Deborah Lacks, who is played by Oprah Winfrey in her older years. And Deborah Lacks is the daughter of Henrietta Lacks, her youngest daughter, and she just wants to learn more about her mom, and she doesn't have the resources because of where she's from and because of the education that she was offered. She doesn't have resources to learn, this is what they mean when they say my mom's cells are immortal. This is what they mean when a doctor's coming to take my blood. They weren't looking for cancer. They were trying to see what I can do, if I can do the same things my mom did. So yeah, I really love being a part of films that are shining light on what African Americans are doing in our community, and it really makes me feel like I'm doing something with my art.
Is there any difference in the preparation for a part where you're playing a real person versus the part
Definitely.
that you're playing a fictional character? What's the difference in your prep?
Well, for Henrietta Lacks, it was actually two real people in my brain. So I had always said that my biggest dream was to play Oprah Winfrey in a film. Oprah has always been my nickname. So when I found out that I would be playing young Deborah Lacks, not only was I playing the real person, Deborah Lacks, I was also playing the younger version of Oprah Winfrey, though we're both playing a character. So I did a lot of research on Oprah, even though, I did a lot of research before I got the role too. But I did so much research on Oprah just to know, like, who am I going to be, portraying the same character with, And then I also learned so much about Deborah Lacks and Henrietta Lacks by reading the book. Rebecca Skloop did so amazingly on that book. And I like doing that homework. So it takes a lot more time and a lot more, dedication when you do have to be true to someone's actual, like, this is an actual person. You can't really just make up anything. And that's amazing, and it's also really cool to play a character that hasn't really been on TV yet, like Keisha on Black Lightning. Now I get to read all of these Black Lightning comics that, like, I didn't know to read before, and now I'm like, wow, I'm learning so much about the DC Comics world now. So it's two different things, but I love them both.
And even a historical character is a version of you, and you're bringing something into it.
Yeah, you always have to bring yourself. You only know what you know. So I can do all of the research on Henrietta Lacks. I can do all of my research on Gila Cells. However, when I'm on screen, how do I feel like Deborah Lacks would bring about the scene? I had one very intense scene, and though I have not gone through that, you'll see it when we watch it. Though I haven't myself gone through that, I can only imagine how I would feel in that situation, and that's how I brought about that emotion and how I put myself in that mindset to be able to tell that story, to be able to bring it to life and make it real.
Okay. And this story also connects with Professor Jeffries. Can you tell us about this assignment that also involved Oprah?
So in when was it? It was December of last year. I got an email from a friend of mine, a former colleague at Essence, said, "Can you come to New York on January 2nd? We want you to interview Oprah." And I texted her to send her back. I was like, I guess. I suppose I could figure out something to do, some way to get to New York City on your dime to interview Oprah. Yeah, I think I could figure that out.
With a hotel room that the beds made themselves.
The whole nine. They were in final production stages for this film, and Essence was planning to put them on the cover, puts Oprah Winfrey and Renee Elise Goldsberry, who played Henrietta Lacks in the movie, on the cover. So they were going to do the photo shoot that second, and Oprah was leaving straight from the photo shoot to go out to LA to start shooting A Wrinkle in Time with Ava DuVernay, which is the next movie that's about to come out. So I had from December to the beginning of January to do all the research that I could about both of the subjects, and in that case they also wanted me to interview the director, George Wolfe. And so not only did I have to read up on everything, and I try when I'm doing any kind of article like that, I really try to read everything I can about the person. But then I realized, like, Oprah's been around for a very long time. She has written a lot of books. She's got a magazine. There's no way I'm going to read all of that, but I read as much as I could about her, and then I had to do research on Renee and her history. And then George C. Wolfe, who is also just a legend in the film and theater. And so there was a lot of homework that I had to do over my Christmas break in order to get ready to do that. And one of the things that I did, the Henrietta Lacks was born and raised in a place called Clover, Virginia, which you all may know of. But Clover used to be a part of I grew up in Danville, Virginia. Clover is about 30 minutes north of Danville. And because I was visiting my mom over the holidays, I said, I'm going to drive to Clover and see what Clover's like. It features prominently in the book. And got in the car and drove to Clover just to give some color, because I knew that I didn't know what the story was going to turn out to be, but I wanted to have a sense of place, and I wanted to have the option of being able to describe Clover if I needed to. So the homework included a drive to a town that, in the book, it makes it sound like the town is not there, but the town is there. People are there with their Christmas lights and sitting on their porches and waving and that kind of thing. So I had a sense of that before I went to New York to do the interviews. And so that also became something that we could talk about in the interview.
Okay, so I have a question for Paul and Lorraine. And this goes a little bit towards story. When you get into these historical stories, not all the facts are there. So, like, for instance, in the story that Lorraine and I are writing, Joan and her team have been very helpful. Joan Williams, our librarian at the Holgate Library, they've been helpful in helping us dig up information. But then there's some parts of the story that you can't get to. So what kind of license do you feel you have when you're dealing with these things that there's not historical information to rely on, and you have to embellish those parts? And maybe Paul first and then Lorraine, because you're at different stages of the process.
Well, on the Emmett Till story, we had two people at that time who were still living and who had covered the trial. One, Simeon Booker, that just passed, and the other was the first woman to cover the trial. Simeon later brought in an editor from Ebony magazine, but at that time, the only woman was reporting from the Memphis paper, and she was honored recently by the National Association of Black Journalists, and Tom interviewed her. But getting the story that she remembered and some of the things that she had to do to cover that story there, getting to know some of the people who were making history by dressing up, how to get the story out, was the only way was to do it by telegraph, and finding out that the only telegraph operator there was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, and having to share that. The most fascinating one was where all of the black reporters from the Chicago paper and the Cleveland paper and the Afro and all of the newspapers had to pretend that they were local farmers there, not reporters. And a number of things. They led the New York Times reporter and the Atlanta Constitution reporter, and a number of them. And the script reflects that, and how they had to set up on the second floor balcony, and they had designed a rope ladder to hang out the window in case some of the radical Ku Klux Klan or other organizations that were in the town of money got up and decided to kill someone, which they they did with Simeon Booker. The sheriff came to him and said, you know, I don't know about you, but if I were you, I would be out of town by tomorrow morning because there's a rumor that they're going to kill you. And Simeon Booker decided he could do his job back at his desk in Washington. There were little things like that. The plan was if things got out of hand, the two women covering the story would go down a rope that they had permanently hanging out the window, and all of the male reporters would just have to jump to get away from any trouble. So those things are added in just to show the gravity of the situation and the the bravery of those African American reporters who covered the case. And as I said, the jury took 20 minutes to come back with a not guilty plea, even though there was outstanding evidence to the contrary.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad that you mentioned the black press being so instrumental in the Emmett Till story. Black newspapers have been instrumental in our research and also oral histories. The way things become forgotten in collective memory and in the way history is taught, these sort of unknown stories that we're talking about, they get pushed to the side by mainstream media, but as you dig down into the black press archives, you can find amazing stories. The way that the 1938 story came to light for me, I was a journalist at that point, and it was in oral history of some older African Americans who had lived in Greensboro at that time, who were school teachers and remembered this happening. These were oral history collections that I was able to access after interviewing one of these people about the more modern civil rights movement, which everybody has written about, Greensboro and what happened in 1960. And each time the elders would try to tell about the 1938 incident, the interviewers would kind of steer them back. Well, that's good, but tell me again about the sit-ins. Tell me about Woolworths. So finally, we were able to develop this story about an earlier incident. Now, we do have to kind of make up dialogue and conversations on the part of people who were no longer alive, because they'd be about 100 now. So little by little, we tried to find details that were accurate. For example, the name of the dorm mother. We had
Mama Mac.
Yeah, we
Mama
didn't.
Mac.
She kind of figures into our story as sort of the boss of these students and keeping an eye on these students, making sure they don't break curfew and so forth. And we did meet an older lady in Greensboro who remembered the name and told us all about the personality of this Mom Mac. And we began to research that name and came up with anecdotes about her, about how if she caught you smoking a cigarette behind the dorm, you'd rather swallow the cigarette than face Mom Mac. So
And that becomes a scene, right?
It does. And we feel that we're embellishing in a way, but we're also using primary research to try to back that up. But it is an act of imagination, right? Because the people aren't around anymore, so.
Can I jump into that conversation? Tomorrow at lunch, we'll have Valerie Boyd, who's the director of the creative nonfiction program at UGA, where Kiana goes to school. She and I both have our MFAs in creative nonfiction from the same school in Maryland, and that was probably the primary thing about that particular genre, is how do you figure out how to tell a true story, but make it compelling. And as you said, one example of that is the Henrietta Lacks book. One of my colleagues in the sciences was reading it, and she was like, this is really good, and it's full of science. And I was like, yeah. And she said, and she's not even a scientist. And I said, no, Rebecca Skloot has a science background, but she's a journalist. So she has all the factual information, but has written things as creatively as possible. So it reads like a novel. It is a challenge to do, but in journalism and in this creative nonfiction, you have some leeway to be creative, but you still have to tell the true story.
I want to turn things over for just a couple of questions from the audience. I know we're running about 10-minute warning on this discussion, which I could go on a lot longer. But I just want to ask you really quickly. So one thing that's really neat about talking to all of you is you're telling history stories in different ways. And Paul has talked about the connection between journalism, and you might go and take it over as Lorraine's doing and write a screenplay. So I wonder if you could just speak to how important it is for students to know how to communicate history in different mediums. Anyone can jump in on that, any or all.
The one thing that is important to know in this environment, particularly, and I said this in class earlier today, when you look at the papers, and I wonder if either of you would speak to this, except for the African American papers, African American stories did not get told in the mainstream papers. There were they weren't covering black news in a news and record or whatever it was called at the time. And so it's so important to me to see these young women here and hope that some of them will go into the field, because what is news now becomes history. Some of you went to see The Post the other night, and you were talking about how what a good movie it was. Well, it's a fictional movie, but it's based on a historical event, and so you see there are different ways to bring that history forward in a way that people understand a story that they wouldn't have understood. So everything that's happening now, that you're living now, will be history at some point. So it is important to document that in some sort of way. Save your Instagram post, I guess.
Okay. Kiana, real quick, is there ever a part of the movie that you don't like? And when these movies come out, they're obviously different than you see them in your head. What do you do about that emotion when stuff comes out and it's something like you don't like?
That has never happened to me. I've always loved it. I think the only part that I don't like is when it ends, because it's over. But this is just like the acting standpoint of this, kind of going off track. Kind of offline, is like sometimes you can get cut out of a film, and that's something that you have to be prepared for if you're trying to work in the film industry, whether you be an actress, a producer, a writer, director. Sometimes your art just isn't received, and you have to have tough skin when you're working in this industry. There's been multiple times, though I've been working professionally for 4 years, it's been, my mom could probably say it better, maybe like 8 or 7 years that I had been like trying to get into the industry. And then once you get in, no matter what field you're in, sometimes like your work can just be thrown away. So you have to, like, being African American, we obviously have to work, 10 times as hard a lot of times to be, get the jobs that we desire. And also you have to be ready for like, you work that hard and you're just there and no, and it's okay because like those punches are going to make you way stronger and allow you to work harder and make better successes.
Now that you've achieved some of those, how cool is it that you're a movie and TV star and you're also in college as a regular college student? What's that like?
It's pretty cool. I'm not gonna even lie. It's really cool. It's because like it never dawned on me until I started working with Miss Winfrey that like people on campus knew who I was, like people that I didn't know. So it was really weird, I'm walking around in my like sweatpants and like a t-shirt and someone comes up to me and like, hey, oh my gosh, aren't you Kiki? And I'm like, whoa, I was just going to class, like it's really crazy to see that because I just hang out with my friends all the time, but it's also really nice to know that like you have peers and friends and like other people on campus, professors actually supporting you. Like it makes me feel like I'm doing something right. All of the years, like all of the sacrifices that my mom and I made, it feels like it's like paying off, and it's good to hear people say, like, good job. It's always really good to hear. It feels good.
Hey, let's give Anita Simpson a round of applause.
Go, Ma!
It seems that she has done a pretty good job with this young lady. All right, let me field a question or two. Somebody's got to have a question. Come on, Anita.
Yeah, I do have a question to the panelists that are writing screenplays and coming up with news stories, etc. And this really has to do with I guess how are you ever worried that the depth at which you are going to express the story is a little bit, it's kind of negative, right? And so how is it going to be perceived on a global level? Do you worry about that, or do you just stick with the truism of it and, hey, just try to receive it because that's what it was? Do you ever soften things? In other words, I guess is a better way to say it. Ask the question.
It may be my ego, but once I decide I like it, and everybody else is going to like it, and I guess I always, once I get to that point, I don't worry about what the audience is going to do, because I think they're going to have the same reaction that I do. So for some, maybe I don't know what it is, but maybe that's me being sure of myself. I think the Denmark VC film, it received a lot of awards, image awards, and won 9. And that didn't surprise me. I said, oh yeah, that's I wonder why it didn't receive more, and so forth. So I don't know what you would call that, maybe being overconfident or something, but I've always felt this was really, really great, and everybody else will think it was great. Now, that hasn't always happened.
You got 3 journalists here too, and if I may say, journalists of a certain age.
Right.
And the training is you tell the truth, you find the truth. You find the facts, and I talk to my students about fact versus truth, because sometimes facts can be used to lie. And so there's ethical training that goes into this. And I tell my students this morning, that our job is not to be public relations for whomever we're interviewing. So my job was not my students and my child back there. She was like, why don't you have a selfie with Oprah? Because I didn't go to be an Oprah fan. I went to interview Oprah to get some information and bring back a story about her. So the training in journalism is you go out and you get, you tell the true story. And I think that translates also, even if you're doing something that's fictional based on truth, you want to tell as much of it as truth as possible.
I think that's right.
Who's got a burning question? Can we get a burning question from the audience? I'm sorry, Lorraine.
Just quickly, I was going to follow through on that because I think that is a great question, and I agree with Professor Jeffries about the nature of journalism and the importance of being true to history. The truth is complex sometimes, and that is something you struggle with if you're trying to turn history into a screenplay. For example, with the Bennett students, was it just a clear case of a victory and then everything was fine with the movies after 1938? We know that's not true. It's more complex what they did, and the kind of victory that they had went deeper than just we won and now Hollywood is going to do what we want with, roles. It wasn't like that. It was more complex. So we do struggle with that a little bit and try to remain true to the situation.
Because there's a temptation to make it a big home run victory for purposes, and then you can really sort of ruin a movie that way, right? If you just try to make it fall into this certain dramatic story as if it were a fictional story.
Right, but we know as journalists, nothing's ever neat and tidy.
Okay, let's have one more question. Jordan, you're going to be the last word.
Okay, thank you. You all being truth tellers all in your respective fields, how do you find balance and maintain a healthy mental state, being as though your careers become a big part of your lives, almost consuming most of your life?
Talk about that. Specifically for me, it took a while for me to understand the difference between like work and knowing that you have to be professional here. You have to make sure like you have your head on straight and you're staying on your business at work, and then like when you're with your friends, you can enjoy yourself and you can, kind of like be more of yourself, show more personality and everything. And that was really hard for me, being that I started in high school, and it's really different. Like we've all been on sets before, and like the energy being on a movie set is very very strict, and you have to be ready to take the punches of everyone being sometimes people can be rude, or like everyone's trying to get their job done. So learning that at an early age actually helped me through my life, whether it be like with professors or with people that I just come into contact with face to face. And it's like work actually helps you out with yourself. So the balance actually becomes one to me.
I used to really love I went into magazine journalism because I love magazines, and I subscribed to a lot of them and read a lot of them. And then when I started working in magazines, I stopped reading them because I was reading the one that I was producing 9 times before the issue came out, and it kind of took the fun out of it. A little, and not the fun out of the job. I liked the job, but then I couldn't just read a magazine for fun anymore, because I'd be like, why would they put that picture in there like that? They should have resized that, and there's a typo, and so then I'm editing every other magazine that I read in addition. And now I read magazines again because I'm not doing it every day. So, the balance, I think, is important, but I also think that when you really, really love what you do, then it's not It's going to be stressful, but it's not a bad stress. You know, I really get, y'all see me. When we get on deadline for our productions here, you know, it really raises my adrenaline level. I really like, you know, that deadline, and we've got to get this done, and how fast can we get this done. So I think that you need to be doing things that you enjoy, and then the digging into it isn't hard anymore. You just like it. You like digging in.
I think I agree with everyone on this panel, but I have gone to movies and seen some I have been critical of. Oh, I wouldn't have done it that way. Oh, no. Oh, that's awful, being done that way. And then I've gone and seen some and said, that was perfect. And then it doesn't make the film that's making any money. So I do have opinions seeing other people's work and thinking, well, they fell short there, or they did an outstanding job there. But I think everything that I've worked on, it hasn't been perfect, but it's been good. Well, I think it has been good. Okay. That's it.
Well, just quickly, I think journalism is a very stressful occupation. It was in my case, but I like the idea of the yoga class, especially at 8 a.m. I think you could find ways to recharge. But the work is important, and so that relieves a certain amount of stress too, knowing that you're doing the right thing.
And so I just want to say, I think that it's really great to hear from these people who are telling history stories in a lot of different ways. And I hope that some student in the audience or other member of the audience has heard something today that gave you maybe a spark, so that you're going to tell a story in some way, and you're going to go on to create some great media or create some great stories in the future based on something you started here. And then if you go on and do that, that makes this panel worthwhile. So we really want to thank you for your contributions, and let's give them a round of applause. Thank our audience for coming out. We're going to show our main event feature. Students, thank you for not going to Club 101 tonight, instead coming here to be a part of the Black History Media Festival on your Friday night. So we're going to go ahead and get a chance to see Kiana's work in this show, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Jordan, could you hit the lights back there? Do we want to take about a 5-minute break and then start the movie? Okay. We'll start up in about 5 minutes.
I'm in Durham, and the black paper that we have is the Carolina